And our co-hosts on the Friday Five this morning in studio, holding over from the first segment, the Admiral Bill Stubblefield. Buddy.
Good morning, Rob. Enjoyed the discussion with Chuck Horst. Good information.
Chuck's a good guy. Delegate Michael Haidt.
Good morning. Good to be here. Chuck is a good guy.
He is, right?
Yes, he is.
And according to Chuck and Wayne Clark, they, having gone in 2020, are the longest tenured members of the House of Delegates out of the Eastern Panhandle, which is striking when you consider that 2020 was just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But Chuck was also saying off air that there's a delegate from Wood County that's making a run on John Overton's longevity.
Yes. I don't know how close he is, but
That would be Anderson.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's got it. John was 34 years, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure how close he is to that, but hey, you could have a new record holder.
We could have that.
Also bringing us their energy on the Friday Five, the longest tenured member of our crew, Mr. Michael Carl. Welcome back.
Great to be here. Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you.
Well,
I like your blazer.
thank you.
Man, very nice.
And I got my deplorables pin.
You love that pen, too.
Yeah.
You do love that pen. Your deplorable pen. Yeah. In the Larry Schultz seat is former delegate John Doyle. Mr. Doyle.
Good morning. Yes, Chuck Horst is a great guy.
How many years did you serve in the House, John?
26.
26.
Wow.
In three different segments. So even if it were more than that, it wouldn't count toward people like Overington or Bill Anderson, because both of them, it's continuous.
What was your longest stretch?
20 years, from 1992 to 2012.
And you were Deputy Revenue Secretary for 4 years?
Three and a half after that in Governor Tomlin's second term.
Very good.
Yeah.
Via telephone, Attorney at Law Joseph Joey Toots Ferretti. Joe, good morning to you.
Good morning, Rob. And since it's my first appearance in the new year, I wish everybody a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well, sir.
Yes, to you.
You were in Florida last week?
I was. I went down to the Orange Bowl game. We have some rooting interest with Penn State, so we went to see the Penn State-Notre Dame game.
That was a heck of a game.
Oh, it was a great game. I actually saw two games. I saw the Texas-Arizona State game here in Atlanta also, because my middle daughter attended Texas, and she had a rooting interest. So she came over, and we went to that game. Saw two great games.
Yeah, who's the Arizona State running back with the funny last name? What's his name?
Oh, Scatterboo.
Scatterboo, yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable. One of the best performances I've seen in a football game ever.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll be a Pittsburgh Steeler next year.
His pro prospects are in question. He doesn't have the measurables that perhaps the NFL is looking for, but that kid's all heart and all football player.
There's always room for a football player, man. Rocky Blyer. Go back a few years on that one, right?
Maybe the Steelers could use a few guys like him.
New head coach, too.
Let's go there.
I'm going there.
That's not going to happen this year.
Not this year. Not this year, but it's coming. I'm telling you. Joe, you will be our leadoff hitter on the program as always. Batting first, hitting leadoff, Mr. Joseph Ferretti.
Well, Rob, yesterday and last evening when we exchanged our subjects for discussion this morning, I put out a task for the panel to, at this momentous time when we're changing administrations, it hasn't happened too often in this country, but it's going to happen again here on Monday when President-elect Trump takes the oath of office and we go from a Democrat to a Republican sitting on Pennsylvania Avenue. I asked the panel to consider, looking back, what you think the most important legacy is going to be, good or bad, for President Biden, and predicting and looking ahead what we think the legacy will be from this new Trump administration. So a couple things came to mind myself in terms of a Biden legacy. I think the two pieces of major legislation that he was able to get through Congress in a bipartisan fashion, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, both laws benefiting West Virginia greatly, I might add. I think that will have a lasting effect for the country in a positive way. And I think also the fact that the country itself was able to recover from COVID after, remember, shutting the economy down in 2020 There was no guarantee that this country was going to rebound the way it did economically. But I think by a lot of measures, including comparatively with the economies of other industrialized countries throughout the world, the United States did very well recovering from COVID. And I think the Biden administration, that will be one of the lasting positive legacies. Negative, Afghan withdrawal, border security, the inflation stickiness that we're still experiencing are negatives, I think, for his legacy. And I think that perhaps the most damaging one is this suppression of information regarding the president's mental acuity and his ability to handle the demands of the job. I think that is something that's going to haunt this country going forward. I think it has further eroded trust in institutions, namely the executive office and the people who work there. And I think that as history will probably show, the accommodations that were given to President Biden are going to be troubling, I think, as information comes out. Looking ahead for the Trump administration, I think in a strange way, foreign policy will change, and perhaps for the better, because as Trump will readily admit himself, as he did in an interview just the other day, his chaotic nature, his transactional nature in conducting foreign policy, his unpredictability actually, in some respects, serves the country well and keeps other leaders across the globe on their toes, not knowing exactly what the United States is going to do. And I think sometimes that helps. So forgive me if I'm damning with faint praise there. And domestically, I think we're going to enter into an era of power politics unlike anything we have seen in the past. I think we're going to question at the end of this upcoming four-year term whether we have co-equal branches of government. I think President Trump has very adroitly positioned himself in a position of unchecked power, both in terms of the legalities of the executive office power granted by the Supreme Court, and also with his co-opting of many rich individuals in this country who, at a moment's notice, can start spending funds politically to primary members of Congress. He is going to keep them in check through those means, and I think he will exert more power than any president we have seen in our lifetime. So that's what the legacy, I think, is going forward. So that's my thoughts on it. Interested in what others have to say.
Very good, Joe, as always. And I'll throw this out there as well. With some pardons issued, I believe, yesterday, my understanding is that President Biden has broken the record for most pardons issued, too. That may also have to be considered as part of the legacy. Now,
agreed.
Larry Schultz is kicking himself that he doesn't get a chance to do 10 minutes of PR on the Biden presidency because he's not here. So he's like, the one show all year I miss. But John Doyle is. John, have at it.
I agree with much of what Joe said. I would add to those two bills, the CHIPS and Science Act. I think the three bills together mean that domestically, Joe Biden is certainly a more successful president than average if you look at all of the presidents we have had. In terms of foreign policy, yeah, I agree. The big I think the big black mark is the way that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was conducted. Not that we withdrew, but the way that it was done. It was just done in a very sloppy and unprofessional manner. By this, on the other hand, though, I do think his standing up to Putin over Ukraine will go down as a very positive. Now, we could argue, and I do on occasion, that there are times that he took too long to let Ukraine have this, that, or the other. But at the same time, there's a strong argument that we really didn't know how Putin was going to react. So it made sense to kind of go one step at a time just to see whether we would provoke him. We haven't. In 2020 hindsight, we could have gone faster. But I still think it is critical to the future of the world that Ukraine remain united, all Ukraine together, and as part of NATO. And I do think that should be our eventual goal.
Mr. Height.
Well, I'm going to say that unfortunately, President Biden is going to go down in history as one of the worst presidents we've ever had. And the reason I say that is, as time goes on, presidents are remembered more for their failures than they are for their successes. And Biden has had quite a few failures, and some of those have been pointed out already. So when people look back on his presidency, I think that's what they're going to remember more than anything else. And you can look at the Carter administration, and people say that was a failed administration, even though Carter did some wonderful things while he was in. For the most part, it was a failed administration. There were gas lines there. I mean, you could go through a litany of things. Carter was a great guy, but he wasn't a very good leader. And I think that's how Biden will be remembered as well. On the other hand, the flip side, when you look at Trump, and I've said on this show many a times, I am not a Trump supporter, don't like the man. However, I do like his policies. And
You did vote for him, though, correct?
I did vote for him. I voted for his policies. I didn't think Biden was a very good man either, but he was a poor leader. And I think actually Trump sometimes is a poor man, but a good leader. His policies are good. I think they're good for America. I think with the whole talk about tariffs and things like that, those are all strategical negotiating things that he's doing right now. And I think that America does better on the world stage when we present a peace through strength type atmosphere. And I think under the Trump administration, we'll have a whole lot more peace in the world. So over the next 4 years, it's hard to determine what's going to happen, but I think America will be better off. And like I said, long term, the Biden administration will be considered one of the worst in history.
Mr. Carl.
Well, I agree with everything I just heard, but
I'm shocked.
going back to the initial.
You didn't say anything that was considered neocon. If you'd have done that.
Going back to the initial presentation in this segment, first of all, it's misleading to say or even imply that the economy wasn't recovering under Trump after the pandemic. It was. The pandemic was a horrible hit to us, no question about it. And the second thing, on the purportedly positive parts of Biden's administration were the big legislation at the beginning, and it didn't hurt us only, or most only, because of Senator Manchin's involvement in key vote position to modify a lot of what was proposed by Biden and his group, so it didn't hurt the country any more than it did. So other than that, I completely agree with my colleague here.
And looking forward to the Trump administration?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I agree with all that he just said about Trump. I mean, I can't stand Trump's personality, but his policies, are what we need, and he's garnering more and more important support for it, in many areas. So I'm expecting a good outcome in this second term of Trump's interrupted presidency.
Admiral.
Yeah, I think the points made have been good points. I'm going to just pick up a couple that I highlight, a couple I agree with. I think on the positive side, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, will be to his credit. Also the student loans and the way he handled COVID. But we're in a position now that if you're a Trump supporter, you see absolutely nothing good in Biden. If you're a Biden supporter, you see nothing good in Trump. Unfortunately we've gotten to that stage in our politics. On the negative side with Trump, with Biden, the Afghanistan withdrawal was an absolute disaster. And I think, as Joe Ferretti pointed out, one thing that'll go down in our think in the future years is the smoke screen that was put up deliberately, I believe, about Biden's dwindling capabilities. This was this was a mistake on any way you want to define it, and I think we as a country will suffer because of it. I think Biden will go down higher than some of the folks think he will be as rated for president, but he's not going to be in the top half. He's probably not going to be in the top 1/3 either, or 2/3 rather. So yeah, he's got a long way to go. I think his strengths, the fact he's a kind, gentle individual, I think like Jimmy Carter, will eventually come and be recognized more so. As far as Trump, there's a lot of rhetoric being thrown around, and it's difficult to sort through what is genuine and what is being proposed for political purposes, what is actually being used for leverage. And I give him credit for that. It's we saw this with NATO his first time around. He took the extreme position. He was not anticipating getting the extreme position, but he got some gains. And I think some of this will happen with what we're seeing with immigration, foreign policy, tariffs. The one thing that I am most fearful of with the Trump administration is retribution. He's made a lot of noises about getting even with folks like Jack Smith and Liz Cheney and others. If he walks down this path, and hopefully he will not, we have become a banana republic. That we take revenge on our political opponents because we have the power to do so. And he's given a lot of lip service to that. I hope that's all it is, just lip service, and I hope he does like he did with Hillary Clinton in times one. He'd lock her up, but once he was president, it never surfaced again. So I'm hoping this is going to be the retribution will kind of become Noah's factor like it did with his first term.
Bill, as a Sicilian, I'm a big fan of revenge. I would run on that.
I apologize. I didn't weigh in on the new administration coming in. And Joe Biden referred to it as a coming oligarchy. I mean, he's not really the right person to make observations like that, but I'll go in one better. I'm seeing that we're going to have a plutocracy with so much dependence on a very small number of people with a whole ton of money. And so I think that should be of concern to Americans. And also to Mike Height, Joe Biden's ratings right now are certainly in the tank. So were Harry Truman's in 1953 when he left office, and I was around then, and I remember everybody saying what a terrible president Harry Truman had been.
Okay. Anyway, was he? Yeah.
And he got a good biographer. McCullough wrote a book and changed a lot of people's minds.
That's the key, Mr. Ferretti.
Well, a couple things that with regard to the Biden legacy again. There's going to be an echo, I fear, tying these two administrations together regarding the capabilities of the individual in office. I think Bill or somebody referred to it as a smokescreen that was put up by the current administration to hide some of the infirmities that President Biden apparently was dealing with. We're going to be in that same kettle of soup with regard to the current fellow assuming office on Monday. He's entering that office roughly the same age as Joe Biden when Joe Biden took over. And if anybody listened to the speech that he gave in Mar-a-Lago 2 weeks ago, that incoherent, rambling mess of a talk he gave, one might be concerned that we might have the same issue arise in this upcoming presidency. And I hope that the media and those people who are employed in the White House will do a much better job of addressing any questions about the mental acuity of the president as he sits in there and in years where he's over the age of 80. There's plenty of people that age who function perfectly well, but there's plenty of people who don't. And I think there will be a question raised at some point whether or not the office holder is up to the job. And I think it's incumbent on those people who have the ability to see the individual working on a daily basis, to be honest with the public about whether or not there's a question of capability. I can't imagine, and again, I think the history books will eventually flesh this out, what risks this country might have endured with a president who doesn't have full capacity. And I believe that this issue may be prominent again, and I hope that those folks who are closest to the position of presidency will be able to at least be candid about any concerns that might arise.
There was a lot of shock in this country by many at the first presidential debate with Joe Biden's performance. And then the accusations began about how long had they been covering this up. But if you remember, when he first ran, he disappeared for like 2 months. For about a month, he was incoherent. You couldn't understand half the things that he said. He had trouble completing sentences. And then he kind of disappeared for 2 months. They just took him out of the public eye for the longest period of time. The only thing you got information-wise was released statements, really. And then he kind of resurfaced. And a lot of people put out the thought that maybe he had had a stroke or something like that. I don't know if that's true or not. Who knows? Who knows
Well,
what the theories were?
COVID helped him in that portion of time. He could
COVID
hide in the
did.
basement.
Bill, just but
Yeah,
finish.
sure
So,
thing. Yeah.
so I had my questions about his mental acuity prior to the start of his administration. On top of that, but what was revealed at the debate, especially with that line that concluded with "We beat Medicare," and Donald Trump answered with, "I don't understand what he just said, and I don't think he does either." At that point, they probably could have saved the expense of having the election, because I think it shocked a lot of people who were giving Biden the benefit of the doubt. And at that point, you could no longer give him the benefit of the doubt. And then he released the statement last week that if he'd have stayed in the race, he would have beaten Donald Trump.
No.
On what planet?
Nobody believes that.
Nobody.
But and he leaves as the lowest rank in terms of popularity, a job approval president in the history of the country, according to a poll that was released last week, which is shocking when you consider Bush 43's number after Iraq. You'd have thought that nobody could ever gone below that. But Biden
or
managed
Trump after
to.
January 6th.
After January the 6th, yes. That's a great point too, Joe.
But Biden's poll numbers had taken a lick, but he was surviving until that first debate, and that made him obvious to everybody that Biden was not up to the task. But then we moved forward a few months, and the debate between Harris and Trump, it was not the same scale. Trump did not embarrass himself like Biden did, but it was not Trump's finest hour either. Harris beat him pretty bad in that debate. So I don't think you can lay everything on the foot of the debates. But certainly in Biden's case,
I think you can in this particular case because
in Biden's case, but not the Trump case.
That was Biden's unveiling. Everybody already knows about Donald Trump. You already know the way he talks. He's going to say some things. You're going to go, where'd that come from? It's just part of who he is now, and people have accepted it. But the Biden thing was a shock because they had hidden him. Kareem Jean-Pierre was basically Joe Biden to America for 3 years until that debate.
I don't think it was hidden to people on the right because
No,
I think
wasn't.
the media tried to hide it as well. So if you're watching Fox News covered all the gaffes from day one.
They did.
And so the people on the right were seeing all that. It's the ones who refused to look at that side of the media. I would go over and watch CNN and some other medias. Those things were never covered. You never saw the president in a bad light on those other programs. So if that's all you're watching, you never would have seen it until the debate.
But the
You have
flip
10
side-
seconds, Bill.
Flip side can be made as well, Mike. Fox News may have picked up on those points, but Fox News presents everything in such a biased way that unless you're a hardcore conservative, you don't watch Fox News.
That's my point. The media on the other side presents it in a biased way and covered it up.
Bill,
Fox is a
Bill, you are on the clock.
Okay, I'm ready.
This is Talk Radio, WNR Martinsburg and TV 10. We are produced by the sports doctor Colin McLaughlin and brought to you in part by the Folks at Hagerstown Ford, they'll deliver your next vehicle to you. You don't like it, they take it back at Hagerstown Ford. Also, by the Mansion Ferretti Law Offices. Joseph, your turn.
Rob, we're located at 201 East John Street in downtown Martinsburg. You may visit us there or contact us on the web at wbjusticelawyers.com. If you have any questions about insurance claims, motor vehicle accidents, or the like, we'll be happy to talk to you.
Thank you, Joseph. And we have worked our way through issue number 1 with Mr. Ferretti in the first segment. As we welcome back our co-hosts on the day, the aforementioned Mr. Ferretti via telephone, John Doyle in the Larry Schultz seat. John, welcome back.
Well, it's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Have you had your fill of your coffee this morning?
I'm about 2/3 done.
Very well. We've seen John without coffee before.
Not a pretty sight.
Keep drinking.
Not a pretty sight.
Keep drinking. Delegate Michael Heights,
Good morning. Great to be here, guys.
longest tenured member of our crew, Mr. Michael Carl,
Great to be with you.
and the Admiral Bill Stubblefield, fresh off the bench with issue number 2.
Thank you, Rob. Last week we had the two county commissioners talking about the budget problems and their perceived need for a 1% sales tax. We had a recently elected delegate, Chris Anders, came on and said sales tax, and I'm paraphrasing, over his dead body. So he's adamantly opposed to it. And I think there may be other delegates agreeing with Chris, but they're not quite as adamant in the way they said it. Which gets me to looking a little bit more at the issue. The county has needs. The fact it's a growth county, we have even more needs. Our public safety, police, emergency services, ambulance authority, all require support from the county. Police totally, most all of them now, more and more. Parks and Recreation gets support from the county. Our library, our schools through the SROs, all of these get support from the county. And the county's sole source of money is through property tax. In other words, all of these needs, all of these requirements are on the back of property owners. Sales tax goes directly to the state. Income tax goes directly to the state. So it's property tax that are funding all of these needs. The county administrators or the county commissioners have made a promise to the voters if they ever get the authority to look seriously at a sales tax, and that they would do through a public referendum. So the voters would have the final say-so whether this is a good idea or not. I've been a strong advocate for a long time that the closer we can get government to the people, the better the government is. And how much closer can you get to the people than a public referendum? I take exception for someone, especially a new elected delegate, come in and said, my constituents, well, not his constituents, a part of the folks that he listens to, that would say, we don't want a sales tax. So he takes this as his mandate to say there will not be a sales tax. The county cannot even present it to the public to see if it's valid or not. My question is, should we in fact look seriously at a sales tax, or give the county the authority to present it to the voters? There's another provision that the county has mentioned, and that's a rollback provision that says for growth counties you can only have 1% more of your levy than what you had the year before. We could, with our growth, we could say $9 million coming in additional property tax. The county would have to roll back its levy so that $9 million would be reduced to $1 million. So we have 2 or 3 things working against the county. I think they're doing an admirable job of providing the services we need, but they have their hands tied. And let me add one more thing, and that's the jail bill, which is in large part on the county's back as well.
And should be the state's bill, not
should be the state. A lot of it. What I would like to see happen is the 6% sales tax that goes to the state, that 1% of that come back to the county.
And then you don't have to raise it by 1%.
Don't have to raise it by. But that's something that the legislators, the delegates. So if someone says no sales tax increase, let's go back and ask that same delegate or those delegates to redirect 1% from that's going to the state back to the county.
So first 5 cents goes to the state, the last 1 cent goes to the county. Delegate Michael Haidt, you are in an elected position. What do you think?
Well, I think sometimes, and Delegate Anders is new, so sometimes you have to learn this as you're down in the legislature. That a lot of times legislation is about the entire state. It's not just about Berkeley County. And while Berkeley County would like this right now, you also have to look at other counties. And I'll give an example of Tucker County. Tucker County is a relatively small populated county, but they have a huge influx of tourism coming there to ski, and all of these people coming into their county tax their emergency services to a great degree. And the burden of providing those services are on the actual individuals within the county currently. And there just aren't enough of them to provide the services that are needed, especially when the tourism comes in. And you can't expect them to continue to be taxed to a point where they need to be taxed to provide that service. So what this legislation would do, or some of this proposed legislation would do, would give counties the opportunity to either have a 1 cent sales tax or an amusement tax. And for a county like Tucker County, an amusement tax would tax all of those individuals coming into the county, skiing and staying at the different camps and locations within the county, and would not burden their individual people, but would provide that extra money for them to enhance their emergency services. So as a legislator, I have to look at this piece of legislation and how it will affect my district and my county, but also I have to look how it affects the rest of the state. And places like Tucker County, Logan County, Wyoming County, Mingo County need this type of legislation because they can't provide the services that are needed in their areas right now.
John Doyle.
I think Mike, in the case of Tucker County, I think you're right. I mean, many of the years I was in, we talked about that kind of situation. The sales tax actually would deal with that too, because the sales tax would be paid in large part by many of those tourists that come to Tucker County.
That is correct.
I think the counties should have the ability to have a sales tax add-on. It is my understanding that any bill that's going to pass the legislature would have the referendum as a requirement.
That's correct.
So I don't think we have to rely on the good graces of the very fine members of the Berkeley County Commission. I think the law is going to tell them if you're going to have this, you're going to have a referendum. I also think it would be a mistake to try to restrict this extra money to certain things, because money is fungible. If you have a larger pot of money and the additional money goes for A, B, and C, but you have other needs elsewhere, what you're going to do is, to the extent that you can, that the law permits, reduce some of the original amount of money that went to A, B, and C and move it over to D, E, and F and the rest of the alphabet. So that's why I think that's a fool's errand, is to try and put restrictions on how they can spend it. I think the restrictions should be whatever restrictions they already have on the money that they get from the property tax. I want to ask the Admiral here to think about his idea of doing it as a reduction in the 6% sales tax. First of all, I think that could have been accomplished 3 or 4 years ago when the state was running these huge budgets. Right now, I don't think that's possible, given the fact that we're looking at some deficits over the next several years. But also, there's an angle that I hope we all consider. This additional sales tax, if the county opts to do it and runs the referendum and the referendum passes, goes into the county coffers, not the school board coffers. Any reduction in the property tax, the majority of it comes out of the school board. So I think you may be accidentally creating a problem you don't want to create if you do it that way.
It would have to go back more to the state. If you reduce the amount going to the schools from the county level, then the state's got to compensate for the schools.
Okay, if that's where part of it, then yeah. In that case, that makes an argument against taking the money away from the state.
Mr. Carl.
Well, I have to acknowledge that I agree with a lot of the points that I've just heard from all sides. Local control is a real plus and something that we need a lot more of in West Virginia. And in fact, even the legislature doesn't have enough control over the state school board, and we had an amendment that would have changed that somewhat, and our new U.S. senator was opposed to it, and I think only Berkeley County carried that, or it might have been a couple other, but local control is really important, and it isn't just fast growing counties like Berkeley and Jefferson, but it's like you're talking about Tucker and that kind of a economy they have and so forth. So we need to move a lot more in that direction and undo the state dominating system, particularly in education that we've faced, and why West Virginia is near the bottom of the stack in terms of successful states.
Joe Ferretti, you have 90 seconds.
Well, 100% to everything I've heard so far. And Rob, I'll borrow a point you made earlier this week in one of the shows that Chris Sanders is a member of a party who for years pounded the table about local control. Now they're in power and they have the possibility of reaching that goal, and there seems to be some arguments against it, and I don't understand it. The issue has to be couched in terms of local versus state control, and I think our friend Chris Sanders is being a little presumptuous to assume that we're going to automatically have a 1% sales tax passed in Berkeley County. I don't know that yet. I haven't heard from the pros and cons about that issue. I haven't heard the county make the case yet, though I do believe it will be an easy case to make because we are lacking services. As John Gilstrap said the other day, our response rates for 911 calls are poor, inadequate. It puts people at risk. I think that's the case that will be made, but I don't assume the tax is going to pass. But I do like the fact that we'll have a say about how we govern ourselves in Berkeley County. So to me, it's just a matter of state versus local control. That's the issue, and I hope that Chris Sanders and others will come around to see that that's a much preferred way to govern ourselves.
Yeah, you can't espouse local control only for the things you approve of. It's either all local control or it's not. Bill, final thought is yours.
Yeah, we've mentioned several ideas. Local control, diverting 1% of the 6% that goes to the state, other ways as well. Fortunately, we have from Eastern Panhandle the vice chair of the Finance Committee who will have some say in what comes out. So I'm sure conscientiously Mike will look at this very seriously.
Mike's vice chair of health.
Vice chair of health. I'm sorry, Mike.
Chuck is vice chair of revenue.
No. You're exactly right. Yeah. Sorry, Mike. I was thinking.
I'm still on finance, so I'll still try to influence it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, we move on to issue number 3, and the Badger has that issue.
All right. I'm going to go with my number 1, and we're going to talk just because John Doyle's here. So my question is: lobbyists, are they demon warriors for special interest, or are they legitimate subject matter experts needed by the legislature?
All right, we do have a lobbyist in the room, in Mr. Doyle. Could you answer that question, sir?
You talking about me?
And you've been on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, I have. Oh, yeah, yeah. A lobbyist is very valuable as long as that lobbyist is honest and ethical about the issues to which they have agreed, about which they have agreed to lobby. And actually, the Ethics Act forbids lobbyists from lying. Now, I don't know how effective that is with some lobbyists, Mike, but particularly since legislators in our state don't have, for the most part, personal staff, the role of the lobbyist becomes actually sort of a quasi-staff person. And a wise legislator will listen to lobbyists from all sides and just try and glean, okay, where appears to be the truth here, or where appears to be the position with which I am most comfortable after listening to all of them. So I think it depends on how the legislator uses the lobbyist.
So they could be demon warriors.
Oh, it could be.
Okay.
And if you let me, I will be. But you shouldn't.
Joe Ferretti.
Well, I kind of have a question before I comment to John and Mike. How often do lobbyists actually get involved in writing legislation?
I never have as a lobbyist. I do know that
when you were a delegate, John, how often did you see the lobbyists come forth with legislation?
I was getting to that. As a delegate, I do remember a number of pieces of legislation that were written by lobbyists. In some cases, by lobbyists who represented local entities, usually the wealthier of the local entities who can afford to hire lobbyists who are trained as lawyers and maybe had served time as bill drafters and who knew about how to write legislation, but sometimes also legislation that came from outside organizations, either outside political organizations or outside economic organizations. And I was very, very careful about that sort of thing.
And I would say, add to that a good bit we see legislation that's presented from lobbyists, and they may ask us as legislators to present it. And I'll give you a quick example. Is I think last year, the year before, I had the optometrist lobbyists come to us with a piece of legislation.
Can I hear Bill say that first? Go ahead, Tom.
Optometrist. With a piece of legislation that dealt with their scope of practice. And you listen to it, and it all sounds good as a legislature until the ophthalmologist lobbyist comes along and counters their. So you have to listen to both sides because they are subject matter experts at that point, and they're talking about stuff that as an individual I don't know anything about. So you have to be able to listen to both sides to be able to make an informed decision on some of this legislation.
You folks on the Republican side get accused of taking boilerplate ALEC lobbying legislation and just copying it and putting your name on it and passing it as law. Yes or no?
I would say some of that happens, absolutely. I've been presented with, not from ALEC, but from other lobbyist groups, a piece of legislation, and I'll look at it and I'll determine for myself whether it like John says, fits in my scope of what I believe, and if it does, I may offer that, tweak it a little bit or whatever, or just hand it back and say, you got the wrong guy.
Mr. Cole.
Well, clearly lobbying is a little bit of both in terms of policy advocacy and laying out the mechanics of what works under the Constitution and what won't clash with existing law or will have the right effect. But that's all part of it on all sides, and the best or one of the positive aspects of that is it calls for a lot of good lawyers.
That's true.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go.
I talked to my wife who works for the FDA because that's a very heavily legislated and lawyered up organization. And her big complaint about Congress is that they write laws that are left open to interpretation. 90% of it is specific, and the other 10% is not, so that it can ultimately be argued in court.
I don't think you can avoid that.
Keeps the lawyers busy.
That challenge, and I'm glad that it does keep the lawyers busy.
It does. It does keep the lawyers busy.
Yeah.
Goes back to you, Mike.
No, I have not had mine yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill.
That's right. And for Rob's benefit, the correct pronunciation, Mike, is eye doctor.
You got the Ferretti laugh on that one.
As far as your question, there's two parts of the lobbyist. One that I very much embrace, the other one that I have some question about. The part I embrace is they provide insight. As John Doyle and others have alluded, they do provide a vehicle to look inside of an issue with some clarity. The part that I have some problem with is buying influence, and that is a risk of a lobbyist. Now, you can buy influence a couple different ways. You can put a lot of money in someone's campaign coffer, or you can do a fairly aggressive wine and dine. Mike Heights heard me say this before when I was both an admiral, where I had some influence, and as county commissioner. I never took even one cup of coffee from someone that was trying to promote something. I felt that if I took that one cup of coffee, I was going that slippery slope. So that was my own view. So I agree with the fact that lobbyists provide insight. I have nervousness when they start buying influence.
Yeah, I look at things a little bit different, and maybe it's just me. As a legislator, I can only be bought if I allow myself to be bought. You want to buy me a cup of coffee and sit down and talk to me? I'll gladly accept a cup of coffee. But don't think that cup of coffee bought my vote. It certainly did not. You got to sell me on the merits of whatever the policy is. And, having a dinner or a cup of coffee or contributing to my campaign does not buy my vote. You still have to convince me that what you want done is the right thing for West Virginia. And if it doesn't, then don't contribute to my campaign next time.
If I could
I don't
respond
care.
very, very quickly, that's we all make a mistake of painting everybody with a wide swath. Mike Height, I have no doubt at all, knowing you and your integrity, that what you say is exactly right. However, there are other elected officials that do not have the same height and integrity that you have.
Well, thank you, sir.
Oh, your name's even part of that compliment.
That was good.
Heightened. I like that. Well, obviously, there's a lot of debate in Berkeley County about the county's lobbyist, right? Mm-hmm. And the expense that goes into hiring a lobbyist.
Sure.
So there are two issues with the county lobbyist. One is, why can't the county commissioners and the Eastern Panhandle delegation represent the area's interest well enough on their own? And two, when you hire a lobbyist, why do you have to pay that much for one, Mike? I know you're not a county commissioner. I'm not asking you to account for the expenditure on the lobbyist, but these folks certainly can make a lot of money doing this. Are their services worth it?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to get accomplished, and there should be a return on that investment. Why do they cost so much? Because that kind of stuff goes out to bid, and somebody like Access Strategies comes back and says, "This is what we're willing to do. What you want us to do." For this amount of money, and you can either pay it or you can go with another lobbying firm or whatever. They've decided to go with Access Strategies. Once you're down there as a lobbyist, as county commissioners, they still have a job to do up here. So it's difficult for them to go down for a 60-day session and lobby 134 individuals to get a piece of legislation passed. As delegates, we're seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of legislation, and we don't have time to focus on one, which is what Access Strategy is doing for the county commission.
On that note, we break here. This segment of the show brought to you in part by the Skinner Accident and Injury Attorneys at SkinnerWins.com. And this date, 1971, the birthday of Kid Rock, who I think is playing at the inauguration, if I have that correct. He plays us into the break here. This segment of our show today brought to you in part by Century 21 Modern Realty Results, Larry DeMarco and Company. Also by the Wagner Law Firm, West Virginia's premier DUI defense attorneys. Hardy Wagner and Company there. 9:35, we move on to issue number 4, and for that we go to John Doyle.
Well, thank you. Lots happened in Jefferson County these past few days, particularly when it comes to planning and zoning. And there are two topics directly related to that I wanted us to talk about as a group. One, on February 23rd at 4, I think it's either 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock. I'll have to look that up. There is a hearing in front of the Board of Zoning Appeals. It's about an application from an entity down on Engel Mollers Road and Trough Road to be a retail store for firearms. Now, to me, the problem with that is it's an entity that a few years ago got a license to train dogs, I believe, for explosives. And this is an important thing to do, and this is probably the right place to do it because it's sort of out in the boonies, although it's right adjacent to a 30-home subdivision, which is, I think, one of the iffy things about it. It apparently has a rifle range, and I don't know. I'm trying to find out whether that was included in the original permit that was issued. But to me, something like that close to a residential subdivision is not a good idea. Secondly, with regard to that, a retail store on a narrow, winding country road that's barely wide enough for 2 lanes. One of these roads has a stripe down the middle. The other one does not. So I think that is iffy, and I do hope that a whole lot of people will show up at that public hearing on January 23rd and at least find out what's going on. The other thing is that the Jefferson County Commission 2 days ago had a special meeting on the proposed master plan for the zoning ordinance. The way the rules work are, you have to write a master plan before you can write a zoning ordinance. And the master plan goes for 20 years, but has to be revised after 10 years to go for another 20 years. So you have kind of these overlapping periods of time. And you cannot legally revise the zoning ordinance until after the master plan has been revised to permit whatever revision you want to put in the zoning ordinance. This is all state law. So what happened was the zoning ordinance came out, was passed by the Planning Commission to the County Commission. Jane Tabb, who just recently left the County Commission, said this is the most non-zoning ordinance, a planning document I've ever seen. It, to me, if you read it, it basically says anything goes anywhere. And to me, I'm in favor of zoning for areas that are growing, like Jefferson and like Berkeley. This is my personal opinion. And I do think in Jefferson, most people want to keep zoning. You could argue that we should not have zoning or don't need zoning. To me, that's an intellectually defensible point of view. I don't agree with it, but I concede that it is intellectually defensible. What to me is not intellectually defensible is to write a document that you call a zoning document and simply say in it, effectively, anything goes anywhere. So anyway, that is, and one other thing that the story in the Journal yesterday did not cover is, I'm pretty certain that the way the law works, if the county commission amends the master plan when submitted to the county commission by the planning commission, even one amendment automatically sends it back to the planning commission, and then it is the property of the planning commission, and then the planning commission can then do more amendments if they want to. The story in the Journal, and I've been on the phone. I haven't gotten anybody on the phone. I made some calls yesterday after I read it to try and find out what other changes might have been made in that special meeting on Tuesday. The Journal story says made some changes, But the only one they talked about was one that I thought was very important, and that was language that basically said that any use is compatible in any zone. That's the language that basically says we don't have, in my opinion, we don't have zoning. So I'm just interested in what the group thinks. And
was there a question in there, Senator?
I did not.
yeah, I just asked it. I said I would like to know what the group thinks.
What do you think?
There's a couple different issues in there,
Yes, I put 2 in there.
right? But there's got to be a more pointed question than what do you think? What is? Let's go to issue number 1 first, which is the proposed business by the subdivision.
Right.
What is your specific question with that one?
Should such a use be permitted in that particular location?
And for issue number 2 on the zoning, what is your specific question for the group to consider?
Was it a good thing that the county commission turned down, made this one change and maybe other changes, which I don't know what they were, and thereby sent it back to the planning commission?
Let me go to a former county commission president, Bill Stubblefield.
Thanks, Rob.
I wanted to lead off with you because I needed to get even with you about something earlier in the week. Go right ahead.
Well, you have more than done that, Rob. I'm at a disadvantage for the next couple months. Okay. Your first one about the winding
By the
road.
way, you can answer about anything else off the board, too. If you want, you can go off the board for another question you'd rather respond to.
John, I have problems in trying to state an issue in what I consider to be inflammatory terms.
Okay.
And you did with us the winding road for a retail store. If they're putting a Walmart down this winding road, that would be one thing. They're not putting a Walmart down there. I don't know if the road can accommodate a retail firearms. I suspect a lot of winding roads can. So I'm not saying pros and cons. The way that you presented it, John, makes me unsure of the answer.
That's fair.
My time.
Okay.
And the second thing is the obligation of the zoning. That's something that's got to be sorted out with the with Jefferson County. I'm not sure that I can make any contribution to that at all.
You made a fair criticism on the term winding road. It is Trough Road, is the road it's going to be on. I believe anybody who's driven Trough Road would accept my description of it.
What would you compare it to in Berkeley County, John?
Oh.
You don't have to know the name of the road, but maybe give us an idea.
How about Eagle School Road?
Okay.
Eagle School. Okay, that gives us an idea because that's fair because there's not a solid.
There are businesses on Eagle School
There
Road.
are. Yeah, absolutely. All right, very good. And how close is this firearms store to the subdivision? How many feet? Yards?
Within 100 yards, I think.
Within 100 yards.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the other question is, did it violate some agreement that the subdivision owners have?
That is a question. Yes, and I do not know the answer.
Is the concern over the actual store, what they're selling, or the range that's there?
I think the concern is more over the range because there's something else. It is right next to the area that has been preserved for the Shepherdstown Battlefield. I'm a member of the Shepherdstown Battlefield Preservation Association. We've already started taking people on tours through that battlefield. And if in fact the permit was granted, I think it would have been granted not understanding what's happening to this particular space.
Very good. Mr. Ferretti.
Well, an observation and a comment, Rob. In terms of John's question about this retail outlet being on a winding road and in a residential area, in Berkeley County, we have something very similar. Valley Guns is located on Old Arden-Knowlville Road as it parallels the interstate. That's a winding secondary road, and it's in a residential area. There's homes that abut the property lines of Valley Guns. And I don't recall any complaints or concerns about that. Now, Valley Guns has a firing range, but it's underground. So if you look at this issue about just a retail outlet being on a windy road, well, there's some examples in Berkeley County where it works okay. Now, if you're going to be talking about a retail outlet that is also shooting above ground and there's noise issues, and they're training dogs and explosives, and there's noise issues, well, that's a whole nother matter. And I suspect that the folks who live in that area where this proposed establishment would go are going to be darn glad, and this is my comment, they're going to be darn glad they have zoning. Because in a county like Berkeley where we don't have zoning, you can end up with an adult novelty store in front of a school. And unfortunately, we have suffered those kind of problems in Berkeley County for a long time. Mr.
Carl.
Well, let me say that, step way back, the inherent, right to use your property, we've all accepted the concept of zoning as a legitimate, limitation on your use of your property, but it's subject to a lot of policy considerations, but you should always remember what you're doing is limiting somebody's use of their private property, and because my firm is so large and I have no idea of who all we may be representing or who even secondarily have they're not immediate parties in these matters, but have a policy interest in them. That's all I'm going to say.
Mr. Height.
So I will assume that under current zoning that this retail establishment is allowed, number one.
Well, no, it's not a conforming use in this particular zone.
So
no.
If it's not, then how would it get approved to go there to begin with?
Well, and this is one of the complications of zoning. The Planning Commission implements the zoning ordinance. You go to the Planning Commission and say, I want to do X use in X area. No, that is not a conforming use. We're turning you down.
Sure.
But you can then go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and ask for what is called a conditional use permit. So there's a second level that you can go to. That is what's going on here. It is not the Planning Commission that is holding this hearing. It is the Board of Zoning Appeals. And the question is, can they get a conditional use permit? And the Board of Zoning Appeals can say, yes, but here are the conditions that under which you will have this permit. And the BZA, the Board of Zoning Appeals, can lay down whatever conditions they wish.
So now explaining it that way, I would say that if you have zoning and you have agreed to certain zoning, then you shouldn't be able to have waivers to that zoning. Either you change your zoning as a whole, like it sounds like they're trying to do, or you have to live by the current zoning. And if you live by the current zoning, then that place has no business going where it's going in Jefferson County. Berkeley County is a little different. We don't have zoning here, and you have places like Valley Guns too that are in residential areas. We had Spark Sports Center for years and years, right beside 81, and right beside residential and commercial areas. Both of those, their gun ranges were underground. There's no reason that this one couldn't be. However, if it doesn't fit within the zoning of Jefferson County, then it shouldn't be allowed, and they turned it down, and they should have turned it down, and the Board of Zoning Appeals should not overturn that.
Well, and I agree with you there, but here's the thing. This is a normal procedure with places that have zoning.
Sure.
Yeah, it can get complicated.
A normal procedure for Board of Zoning Appeals should be to say no as well. That should be the normal course of action.
That never seems to happen, though.
Yeah.
As a person who's lived under the auspices of zoning for as long as I have, if a developer with enough money comes in, we'll change that. Sure, absolutely.
Exactly.
All the other rules be damned. All right, we move on to, unless you have a final thought there, John, we move on to
no,
Mr.
thank
Carl.
you. I want to thank everybody for their observations.
All right, Mr. Carl with issue number 5.
Okay, to follow up on the earlier discussion about Biden and his, reputation once he's out and what he did and what he didn't do and all that. Would that raise the same issue or question and point regarding outgoing Governor Justice. Ooh. And name a single thing that he clearly came up with and initiated and that went well and is a positive an improvement in in the policies of that on any area in West Virginia?
Let's start first with Delegate Michael Haidt. He was there firsthand.
Well, not for all 8 years I wasn't. I would have to say the Roads to Prosperity has probably been a successful piece of legislation that he initiated. I think came out of his offices. The legislature bought into it, and it has worked pretty well throughout the state. We got a lot of roads repaired and upgraded that needed to be done. So that piece of legislation, all of the other legislation, I would have to give most of the credit to the legislature rather than the governor. But that one in particular, him.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, and I was going to echo Mike, Roads to Prosperity. I'd also, even though it's not legislation, I thought the way he handled COVID was very good. He took the lead in being aggressive, and he took a lead in such a way that it did not shut down our economy. So those two, Roads to Prosperity and COVID.
John?
COVID, yes. I do think he handled COVID properly. I don't include the Roads to Prosperity for this reason. The way it was written, it's permitted some projects which to me are basically maintenance. You should not do maintenance with bonding. I just think that should be fundamentally not done because you end up losing money when you do that. It should have been restricted to long-term projects that would bear fruit. Maintenance should be done out of the regular budget. I can't think of anything else, Mike, that he did. I do think, even though I have many philosophical disagreements with the new governor, Patrick Morrisey, I do think Patrick Morrisey is much more of a policy person than Jim Justice. Jim Justice seemed to me to be only concerned with how good Jim Justice looked. And I don't see that he has any core beliefs about what policies are good and what policies are not good. And I also think I'm going to weigh in on something here that I was thinking about bringing up, and that is the fact that Jim Justice waited until Morrisey took office or was ready to take office to resign from the Senate, and thereby sacrificed, I think, something like 10 days of seniority. And there are a lot of people saying, well, his seniority doesn't make any difference. To me, it does, because it's West Virginia's seniority. And he fell behind all of the other incoming U.S. senators. There are 3 or 4 of them that were brand new, all elected this year, and he fell behind them in terms of seniority. And I particularly the Republican ones, the one from Utah, I think there's a new one from Missouri or wherever. But at any rate, I just think that was wrong for him to do. And the problem is this stupid system we have in West Virginia, whereas if the governor leaves, we sort of say we're going to have a prime minister for 10 days and then another prime minister for 30 days. And it's sort of like the governments in Italy after World War II. And I just think we have to change it.
Speaking of Italy after World War II, Mr. Ferretti.
Well, John Doyle, your comments about Justice and his, I guess, ability to always take credit for a lot of things, and that's kind of the central focus of his administration. I guess that's why he and Donald Trump get along so well. It's a weakness to go last on this subject because there's so few public policy initiatives coming out of the Justice administration that I'm at a loss to really identify anything. I will recall, and I'm sure this will bring a smile to Mike Carl's face, I do recall him entering the governor's mansion wanting to raise a bunch of taxes because, as he said, the state was on life support and it was on the table and it was about to die and he needed to, raise a bunch of revenues. Isn't it ironic, after 8 years of his leadership in the state, that the first thing that Governor Morrisey has to come forward with is the identity of a budget shortfall of $400 million as he starts out his administration. And he said, quote, "This is something we inherited." If that's not an indictment of Governor Justice, I don't know what is. But we seem to be right back into the same kettle of fish we were in 8 years ago.
Mike, the question on that is, the governor obviously wanted the additional income tax cut above the trigger of another 5%. I think it was negotiated down to 2%, if I recall. So the obvious question is, did you guys not know about this impending deficit, that you approved the additional on top of the trigger?
Well, we did. And you have to also remember there's a $400 million reserve fund just for these tax cuts that sits in the, if there is a revenue shortfall that we can pull from. This isn't part of the rainy day. That's the whole reason that money was set aside, in case there were issues like this, that we could get through them. And I don't, I'm hearing there's a $400 million deficit. I don't know. I'd have to see the budget numbers before I'd agree to that.
20 seconds, John. Then
I'm going to stick up for the current legislature on this. Part of the problem was that Justice did away with these 6-year forecasts that the Department of Revenue had been doing. So the legislature, in recent years, during the most of Justice's term, has been to a very great degree in the dark about what the finances exactly were.
Yeah, because you don't know what's going to hit
exactly
in year 2, year 3, year 4.
Right.
Yes.
Mike, final thought is yours.
A lot of good points made, including, and I find myself in large agreement with John Doyle, which is rare, except for the concern about Justice not signing up as early as he could on seniority. If you're not sitting in the seat in the Senate to vote, your seniority is irrelevant.
Concede the point.
You mentioned Italy. I'll send you out with Joe Dolce before final thoughts. You get 8 seconds apiece next. We have final thoughts, 8 seconds apiece, starting on the phone with Joe.
Rob, it's symbolic, but as Trump gets sworn in, D.C. Council just voted to ban all right turns on red lights.
John Doyle.
I've decided to not attend President Trump's inauguration because, among other reasons, it's going to be too darn cold.
Amen, sir. Mr. Stubblefield.
Well, I wish the new administration the success for the next 4 years.
Mr. Carl.
The Mountaineers need to get their best players back if they're going to beat any ranked teams.
Mr. Height.
Some people consider the U.S. Capitol hell, and hell's about to freeze over.
That's true. Hey, Scott Brown, you get something for your indigestion. Larry Schultz wasn't here this week. And Eric O'Rourke, no, Larry didn't go to the inauguration. Hey, this is Talk Radio. We're on our Martinsburg and TV 10 talks again in 70 short hours.